The camp stood on the edge of the alien city, where the ruins rose like broken teeth against the pale sky. Humans had been traveling for weeks, moving from one abandoned world to another, and this city seemed as good a place as any to rest. The buildings were half collapsed, their walls cracked and covered with strange markings. Vines had grown through shattered glass, and the streets were filled with dust that seemed to whisper under the cold wind. Myra, a young engineer, walked along the edge of the camp with a small device in her hand. The device measured the power of the shields that now protected the group. She checked the glowing numbers carefully, her eyes narrow, her lips pressed tight. She did not like what she saw. The shields were weak, only at half strength, and the energy cells were already running low. If anything attacked during the night, the shield would not last long. Aaron, a tall man with strong arms and tired eyes, stood near one of the fires, watching her work. He had been a soldier once, trained to fight in faraway wars, but now he was only a guard for settlers who wanted to build a new home. He called out to her in a low voice. "Is the shield ready?" Myra shook her head. "It is holding, but not for long. If the power falls again, we will have nothing between us and the ruins." Aaron looked out at the city. The shadows stretched long as the sun dipped behind the broken towers. He had walked those streets earlier and had felt something strange, as if the air itself was listening. He had heard no birds, no insects, no sound of life. The silence pressed on him like a weight. The settlers gathered around the fires, their faces pale from hunger and fear. They had traveled across stars to find safety, but safety was never easy to find. Some carried tools, others carried simple weapons, but most carried only hope. They whispered to each other, asking if tonight would be peaceful, asking if tomorrow would bring them closer to a true home. Children clung to their parents, and even the strongest settlers kept glancing at the dark ruins. Myra finished her checks and joined Aaron near the fire. She rubbed her hands together, trying to fight the chill that always came with night on this world. "This place feels wrong," she said quietly. Aaron nodded. "It is too quiet. I do not trust quiet places." They sat together, sharing a piece of hard bread that tasted of dust. Myra looked at the settlers and felt the weight of responsibility. She was no leader, but she was one of the few who understood machines, and without her, the camp would have no light, no shield, no hope of lasting through the night. Aaron, too, carried a heavy burden. He knew that if danger came, it would be his task to fight, even if the odds were poor. As the sky darkened, the fires seemed small against the growing shadows. The towers looked taller in the fading light, their jagged shapes like claws reaching for the stars. Myra listened, her ears straining for any sound beyond the crackle of fire and the soft voices of the settlers. But there was nothing. The silence of the city was endless. A young boy named Lian came to her side. He was only 12, his clothes worn, his eyes wide. "Miss Myra," he asked, "are we safe tonight?" Myra forced a smile. "We are together, and that makes us strong. Stay close to the fire, Lian. Do not wander." The boy nodded and ran back to his mother. But the question stayed in Myra's mind. Were they truly safe? Aaron stood and walked the perimeter of the camp. He checked the barriers made from broken walls and scattered metal. They were weak, but better than nothing. He touched the shield, feeling the faint hum of energy beneath his palm. It was thin, like the skin of a bubble, and he knew it would not stop a real attack. Night came fast. The stars shone bright, too bright, in the clear sky. The moon of this world was red, and it cast a strange glow over the ruins. The fires flickered, and shadows danced across the camp. The settlers spoke less and less, their voices fading into silence as they waited for sleep that would not come easily. Myra stayed awake by the shield, her hands on the controls, her eyes on the glowing numbers. She whispered to herself, making small promises that she would keep the shield alive. Aaron sat near her, his weapon resting across his knees, his eyes scanning the city again and again. Then came a sound. It was small, soft, almost too faint to hear, like the scrape of stone against stone. Myra's head lifted. Aaron froze. The settlers stirred, their faces turning toward the ruins. The sound stopped. Silence returned. But now it was not the same silence as before. It was a silence filled with tension, a silence that made the heart beat faster, a silence that promised something unseen was waiting. Myra swallowed hard. "Did you hear that?" Aaron nodded. "Yes. Something is out there." The fires burned lower, the shield hummed weakly, and the camp held its breath. Beyond the broken towers, the city watched with dark, empty eyes. The night was just beginning, and none of them knew what it would bring. But in every heart, a question grew heavy. What was waiting in the ruins? The night deepened, and the camp sat in uneasy silence. The fires had burned low, leaving only soft red light glowing in the ashes. The shield gave off a faint shimmer, like heat rising from stone, and Myra could see how weak it had become. The numbers on her device dropped slower now, but they still dropped. She pressed her lips together and whispered, hoping the system would last until morning. Aaron had walked the edges of the camp 3 times, checking every barrier, every wall, every weapon. He stopped near the northern side where the ruins stood closest. There, the shadows seemed thicker, as if the dark itself had gathered to watch them. His hand rested on his weapon, and his eyes scanned the streets. He had seen many strange things in his years as a soldier, but this silence was worse than any battlefield. Some of the settlers had finally drifted into restless sleep, but others sat awake, too afraid to close their eyes. Mothers held their children close, and old men whispered prayers in low voices. Every sound inside the camp seemed too loud: the crack of firewood, the cough of a tired man, the shifting of boots in the dirt. It felt as if the city might hear them. Then it came. A sound split the night. It was not a roar, not a call, not any sound a human could name. It was a cry, sharp and long, that shook the still air. It rose and fell like wind through iron, but filled with pain, rage, and hunger. The cry echoed across the ruined towers, bouncing from wall to wall until it surrounded the camp from all sides. The settlers froze. Children covered their ears and pressed their faces into their parents. Men gripped weapons, though their hands trembled. Women pulled blankets tighter around their families as if cloth could stop a sound like that. Myra felt her heart slam against her chest. The device in her hand nearly slipped as she looked toward the ruins. She had never heard anything like it. It was not one voice. It was many. The cry came again, louder, joined by others, rising and falling in a dreadful harmony. Aaron shouted for silence inside the camp. His voice cut through the panic, and for a moment, people listened. He stood tall, his eyes on the dark streets. "Stay close to the fires. Do not run. Whatever is out there, it is trying to frighten us." But Myra whispered under her breath, "It does not need to try. We are already afraid." The cries continued, echoing, circling, never stopping long enough for silence to return. The sound seemed to crawl under the skin, filling every thought. Some settlers covered their heads, rocking back and forth, while others held their weapons so tightly their knuckles turned white. A man named Bren, one of the stronger settlers, stepped forward with anger in his eyes. "We cannot sit here like prey. We must leave this place. If we march now, we may outrun whatever is making that sound." "No," Aaron said firmly. "If we leave the camp, the shield will fail, and we will be hunted in the open. Out there, we are nothing but shadows in the dark. Here, we stand together." Bran looked ready to argue, but another cry tore through the night, closer this time. Even he stepped back, his courage shaken. Myra adjusted the shield's power, forcing the cells to push harder. The shimmer grew brighter, but she knew she was burning energy too fast. Still, she could not let the fear take over. "We must hold this place until morning," she said. "The sun may weaken them. At least we will see what we face." Aaron nodded and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we hold." Hours seemed to pass with the cries circling the camp. No one slept. The settlers sat in silence, broken only by the endless sound outside the walls. The red moon moved slowly across the sky, painting the ruins in blood-like light. Then came the first movement. Aaron's sharp eyes caught it near the broken tower to the east. A flicker of light reflected off something 2 points that gleamed like glass. Eyes. They vanished quickly, but he knew he had seen them. He raised his weapon, his body tense, ready for what was coming. Myra followed his gaze. "What did you see?" "Eyes," Aaron said. "Watching us." As if to answer him, another cry broke out, louder, deeper, so close that the ground seemed to shake. Then more eyes appeared, glowing faintly in the shadows between walls. One pair became 3, then 5, then 10. They moved with silent steps, closing in, never leaving the cover of broken stone. The settlers gasped. Mothers held their children tighter, and men raised their weapons, though none dared fire yet. Fear filled the camp like thick smoke. Aaron stood in front of them all. "Hold your ground. Do not waste fire until they show themselves. Stay together." The cries changed. They grew faster, sharper, almost like laughter. The sound pressed against the ears, forcing many to cover their heads again. Myra stared at the glowing eyes. Her mind raced. These creatures were intelligent, too intelligent for simple beasts. They were testing the humans, pushing them to break, trying to drive them into panic. She felt her fear claw at her, but she forced it down. The night dragged on, every minute stretching like an hour. The glowing eyes shifted, circling the camp, but never attacking. The cries rose and fell, sometimes distant, sometimes near, but never gone. At last, Myra turned to Aaron, her voice low. "They are waiting. They want us weak. When they come, they will come together." Aaron nodded, his jaw tight. "Then we must be stronger. No matter what happens, we stand as one." The settlers listened to his words, clinging to them like a rope in a storm. Fear still filled their hearts, but there was also a spark of courage. The cries grew again, higher, sharper, closer. The eyes glowed brighter in the dark. The first wave was coming. And the night of screams had only just begun. The cries grew louder until the very air seemed to shake with the sound. The settlers huddled close to one another, their eyes wide and their breaths short. Shadows moved between the ruined towers, and glowing eyes shifted in the dark like sparks floating above black water. The humans knew the creatures were all around them now. The fear inside the camp swelled until it was like a storm about to break. The first attack came fast. From the eastern side of the ruins, a shape leapt forward, crossing the shattered wall with a speed too quick for the eye to follow. Its body was tall and thin, its limbs stretched too far, and its mouth opened wide in another scream. The shield flashed bright blue when the creature struck it, shaking like glass under heavy fists. Children cried out. Mothers covered their heads. Men raised their weapons and fired, but the shots only lit the dark for brief seconds before the shapes vanished again. Myra held her breath as the shield bent under the force. She rushed to the controls, her fingers moving across the device, pushing the power higher even though she knew it drained their last cells. Aaron shouted for calm. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Do not break. Stay together." But the settlers were breaking. A young man named Joran dropped his weapon and stumbled back toward the fires, his face pale with terror. "We cannot fight them. We will all die here," he screamed. His words spread panic like fire through dry grass. Some people tried to stand and run, but others grabbed them, begging them not to leave the safety of the shield. Another strike hit the barrier, this time from the west. The shield flared again, weaker than before. Myra cried out, "It cannot take much more. If they strike all at once, it will fall." The settlers began to argue. Bren, the strong settler who had demanded they flee earlier, pushed through the crowd. His eyes burned with fear and anger. "We cannot wait for death. We must run now while we still can." "No," Aaron said firmly, standing in his way. "If you lead them into the ruins, they will be picked off one by one. That is what the creatures want." Bran's fists clenched, but before he could speak, another scream rose, closer than ever. This time it was answered by three more, all from different sides. The glowing eyes pressed nearer to the barrier, dozens of them, flashing bright in the dark. The settlers shrank back, covering their ears as the sound ripped through their minds. One of the creatures slammed against the shield again. Its face was clear now, twisted and sharp, with skin like stone and eyes that burned with pale light. Its mouth opened too wide, and the scream that came from it made even Aaron step back. The shield rippled under the force. Myra's fingers shook as she tried to hold the system steady. Sweat ran down her face though the night was cold. She wanted to scream herself, but she forced the fear down. "It will not last," she whispered. "I cannot hold it forever." Panic spread deeper in the camp. Some settlers pulled at the barriers of stone and metal, ready to make a path to flee. Others clung to their families and prayed. The fires burned low, and the light seemed to shrink, leaving the camp small and fragile in the vast dark. Aaron stepped forward, raising his voice above the screams of the creatures and the shouts of the settlers. "Listen to me. If you run, you die. If you stay, you may live. These things are trying to break us with fear, but we are not broken people. We are human. We stand together, or we fall apart." His words slowed some of the panic, but not all. Bran still shook with rage. "You are wrong, soldier. You think courage will save us, but courage cannot stop what is out there." Aaron's eyes locked on him. "No. But courage can keep us from tearing ourselves apart before they even reach us." Before Bran could answer, another strike hit the shield, this time from above. One of the creatures had climbed a half-fallen tower and leapt down onto the barrier. The shield shrieked under the blow, light flashing across the camp. Sparks flew from Myra's device, and she fell back with a cry. The settlers screamed as the shield flickered, almost fading. Aaron fired his weapon. The blast lit the night, striking the shape on the barrier. The creature fell back with another cry, but more came forward, their eyes bright, their limbs moving with speed and hunger. Myra scrambled back to her feet, her hands flying across the controls. The shield steadied, but only barely. "I cannot keep doing this," she said through clenched teeth. "We are nearly empty." The settlers began to weep. The panic was close to tearing them apart. Aaron saw it in their faces, in the way their bodies shook, in the way their eyes darted toward the dark streets as if they searched for an escape. He stood tall, raising his weapon high. "Do not give in to fear. Fear is what they want. Look at me. Stand with me. Stand with Myra. Stand with your families. If you run, you die alone. If you stay, you fight with all of us. Choose now." The settlers looked at him, their fear still heavy, but his voice pulled them back from the edge. Slowly, weapons lifted again. Slowly, men and women turned back to the barrier instead of the streets. Even Bran lowered his head, though his hands still shook. Another scream split the air. The creatures were gathering. Their eyes glowed like 100 tiny moons, circling, waiting. The shield flickered, Myra's hands trembling as she fought to keep it alive. Aaron stood at the front line, his jaw set, his eyes never leaving the dark. He could feel the fear pressing down on him too, but he refused to show it. The settlers needed strength, and if they saw him fall, they would fall too. Inside the camp, the panic did not vanish, but it changed. It became something else. It became a sharp, hard fear, the kind that holds a person steady when there is nowhere left to run. The creatures screamed again, and this time they rushed the shield together. The barrier shook with a blinding flash. Myra cried out as sparks flew from her device. Aaron raised his weapon. The settlers raised theirs. The night of panic had turned into the night of battle. The shield shook like a drum under endless blows. Light flashed again and again as the creatures struck, their screams filling the camp until it felt like the night itself was alive with terror. Sparks flew from Myra's device, and the numbers dropped lower with every strike. Her hands moved quickly, pushing the failing system beyond its limits. She knew that if it collapsed now, the creatures would pour in, and nothing would stop them. Aaron stood at the front, his weapon raised, his body still though his heart raced. The settlers behind him clutched their weapons and tools, faces pale, eyes wide, but this time they did not scatter. The panic that had nearly broken them was changing. Fear was still there, but it was shaping into something else. It was becoming resolve. The first breach came with a sound like glass shattering. The shield bent inward, a hole opening wide enough for two of the creatures to leap through. They landed inside the camp with twisted bodies and glowing eyes, their mouths open in screams that rattled the bones of every human who heard them. Aaron did not wait. He fired, the blast lighting the night. One creature staggered back, its chest torn, but it did not fall. The settlers shouted in terror, but Aaron roared louder. "Fight them! Now!" Bren, who had wanted to flee, stepped forward with a heavy hammer in his hands. With a cry of rage, he swung it at the second creature, striking its side. The blow knocked the beast to the ground, and others rushed in, stabbing with spears, striking with tools, forcing it back. The first creature lunged at Aaron, its claws slicing the air. Aaron rolled aside, firing again and again until the beast finally dropped. The settlers cheered in shock, their fear breaking into wild hope. Myra saw the breach growing wider. She slammed her hand against the controls, rerouting power from the fires into the shield. The flames in the camp dimmed, but the barrier flared again, closing just as more creatures tried to force their way through. The gap sealed, and their bodies slammed into it, howling with rage. The settlers stared at Myra with wide eyes. "Leanne, the young boy, whispered, she saved us." Myra shook her head, sweat dripping down her face. "I only bought us time." But time was all they needed to find their strength. Aaron stood tall, his weapon smoking in his hands. He looked at the settlers, his voice strong. "You see? They can bleed. They can fall. We are not helpless. We are not prey. We fight, and we survive." His words struck deep. The settlers, still shaking, nodded. Bren raised his hammer again, his voice loud. "We fight." Others echoed him, their voices growing stronger until the camp was filled with shouts of courage instead of cries of fear. Myra forced the shield into a steady hum, though she knew it would not last long. She turned to Aaron. "The barrier is weak. If they strike again in numbers, I cannot hold them." Aaron nodded. "Then we prepare. If they come through, we make them pay for every step." The settlers moved quickly now. Instead of hiding, they worked together. Men and women dragged heavy stones to block weak spots. Children passed sharp tools to those who could use them. Even the elders joined, carrying wood, tying ropes, and building what they could from broken ruins. Aaron led small groups to set traps at the edges of the camp. They tied sharp metal to ropes, stretched them low across the ground, and set up makeshift spikes from broken beams. They built barriers from rubble, turning the ruins into walls. The camp became a fortress made not of steel or technology, but of human will. The creatures circled outside, their glowing eyes never leaving the humans. They screamed and struck the shield, testing it again and again. Each impact shook the ground, but the settlers no longer cowered. They stood ready, weapons in hand, hearts beating with new fire. Myra worked without pause. Her fingers were raw from handling wires, her arms heavy from dragging power cells, but she would not stop. She rerouted energy, fused broken parts together, and pushed the shield far beyond its design. Each time it flickered, she forced it back, whispering to herself, "Hold. Just hold." Aaron checked on her often, his voice calm even as the screams outside grew louder. "You are keeping us alive," he told her. She shook her head. "We are keeping each other alive." The settlers gathered around the fires again, but this time they did not tremble. They sharpened spears, tightened ropes, and checked weapons. Bran stood tall, his hammer resting on his shoulder. The man who had wanted to flee now worked harder than anyone, building walls and lifting stones. He looked at Aaron once and said, "You were right. If we stand together." Aaron gave a nod. "That is the only way." The cries outside grew sharper, angrier. The creatures did not understand why their prey had not broken. They moved through the shadows, searching for a weak point, waiting for the shield to fail. When the next strike came, it was stronger than before. Dozens of claws tore at the barrier, their bodies slamming against it again and again. Myra screamed as sparks burst from her device. The shield flared, dimmed, then held. The settlers braced themselves, their weapons ready. The ground shook under the force of the attack. Aaron shouted, "Hold your lines." The barrier cracked open again, a gap wide enough for 3 of the creatures to break through. They leapt inside, their screams piercing the camp. This time, the settlers did not panic. Bran swung his hammer into one, knocking it to the ground. 2 women with spears struck it again and again until it stopped moving. Aaron fired at the second, while another settler dragged one of the traps into place. The creature stumbled into it, claws caught in sharp wire, and the group fell on it together. The third creature rushed toward Myra, its eyes burning bright. For a heartbeat, she froze. But then Leanne, the boy, threw a rock that struck the beast's head. It turned just enough for Aaron to fire, blasting it back. Myra gasped, but then she smiled at the boy. "Good throw." Leanne grinned, though his hands shook. "We fight together." The shield closed again, the breach sealed. The creatures outside screamed with rage, but the humans stood firm. The camp was scarred, the shield failing, but the settlers had found something greater than fear. They had found resolve. The night was far from over, and the creatures would come again. But now the humans were ready. They were no longer prey hiding behind a wall. They were defenders of their own lives, builders of their own survival, and fighters who would not bow to the dark. The night of screams had begun with panic, but now it burned with human courage. The camp was alive with the sound of steel, fire, and screams. The creatures struck again and again, each wave stronger than the last. The shield flickered like a dying flame, its blue light flashing across the faces of the settlers. Myra held the controls with trembling hands, forcing the system to stay alive though every spark told her it could fail at any second. Outside the barrier, glowing eyes filled the ruins. The creatures moved in groups now, their thin bodies twisting as they climbed over broken walls and roofs. Their screams rolled together into one endless roar that pressed against human ears until it felt like the world itself wanted to break. Aaron stood at the front line, his weapon hot from firing. His arms ached, but he did not lower it. Every time a shape appeared near the barrier, he aimed and fired, pushing them back. Bren and a group of settlers guarded the other sides, their makeshift weapons ready, their traps laid across the ground. Everyone had a task now. Even the children carried stones and passed them to the fighters, refusing to hide. The first breach came with a sound like thunder. The shield tore open on the southern side, and 5 creatures rushed through at once. Their bodies moved with terrifying speed, claws flashing in the moonlight. "Hold the line!" Aaron shouted. Bran swung his hammer, striking one in the chest with a crack that echoed through the camp. The beast fell but scrambled to rise again, shrieking. 2 settlers drove sharpened spears into its side, pinning it to the ground. Aaron fired at another, his shot tearing through its head and sending it sprawling into the dirt. The others charged deeper into the camp. A woman with an axe blocked one, striking its arm before it could reach the children. Blood sprayed dark across the ground, and the beast staggered. The children threw stones at it, their small hands fast and fearless, slowing it until adults finished it off. The fight turned wild, every corner filled with motion. The shield sparked as more creatures forced themselves through new cracks. Myra shouted, "I cannot hold them much longer." "Then we fight without it?" Aaron answered, his voice steady even in chaos. The settlers roared in reply. Fear was still there, but it was no longer ruling them. They struck with rage and desperation, each blow fueled by the will to survive. Fires spread across the camp as torches were thrown and broken. Smoke rose, filling the air with choking heat, but it also blinded the creatures, slowing their rush. Aaron seized the moment. "Drive them back into the smoke. Make them lose their eyes." The settlers obeyed. They fought not as scattered prey but as one body. Bran led a group on the left side, pushing with heavy blows. Myra's team of workers hurled burning wood at the breaches, forcing the creatures to stumble. Aaron fired again and again, his shots clear and sharp. But the creatures did not stop. For every one that fell, more appeared at the barrier. They climbed the walls of the ruins like spiders, dropping into the camp from above. One landed near Myra, its claws raised. She cried out, swinging the broken end of a pipe she had been using as a tool. The blow struck its face, and Aaron finished it with a blast. Myra caught her breath, then forced herself back to the device. Even failing, the shield gave them moments of warning. She could not let it die yet. Her hands bled from sparks, but she kept working. Another wave struck. The ground shook as 3 beasts slammed into the northern wall. The barrier shattered there, leaving a wide gap. Aaron ran with his fighters, shouting, "Hold the gap." They formed a line, spears forward, weapons raised. The creatures charged. The clash was brutal. Spears broke, claws slashed, and the night filled with the cries of both sides. Aaron fired into the mass, his shots tearing holes that the settlers filled with blades and hammers. Bran smashed another down with his hammer, blood covering his arms, but he did not stop. A woman swung her axe until it stuck deep in a beast's chest, and she left it there, grabbing a fallen spear to keep fighting. The creatures were strong, but humans were stubborn. They refused to break. Myra saw another part of the shield fading fast. She made a choice. With shaking hands, she overloaded the system, pouring all remaining energy into one final burst. The shield flared bright across the camp, a sudden wall of light. It blinded the creatures and burned their skin where they touched it. Many screamed and fell back, giving the settlers a moment to breathe. The device burst in her hands, sparks flying. Myra cried out as smoke rose, the shield collapsing for the last time. The camp was open now. There would be no barrier left. Aaron saw the light fade, but he did not let fear show. The shield is gone. The walls are gone. But we are not gone. This is our ground. Make them bleed for every step they take. The settlers shouted back, voices strong, voices full of fire. They lifted weapons, stones, and tools. They were tired, hurt, and scared, but none of them stepped back. The creatures came again, a wave of glowing eyes and twisted bodies. The humans met them head-on. Spears pierced, hammers struck, blades cut, and stones cracked against skulls. Children shouted as they threw rocks, their voices rising with courage. The battle raged through the night. Fires burned high, smoke covered the stars, and the screams of beasts mixed with the cries of humans. But for every human that fell, 3 more took their place. For every strike that broke a weapon, another hand lifted a new one. Myra stood with a piece of broken metal, swinging at anything that came near. Her arms shook with exhaustion, but she kept moving. Aaron fought at the front, his weapon nearly empty but his spirit unbroken. Bren stood like a wall, his hammer smashing again and again until the ground was covered with broken bodies. The creatures did not understand why their prey had not broken. They had circled, screamed, and struck, but still the humans stood. Still they fought. The night was filled with chaos, but inside that chaos burned something stronger. Human resolve had turned into human fury. They were no longer hiding. They were no longer waiting. They were fighting for every breath, and they would not stop until the night ended. The battle of the night had begun, and the humans were not giving in. The night seemed endless. The stars above were hidden behind smoke and fire, and the camp was nothing but shadows filled with battle cries. The creatures pressed on from every side, and still the settlers fought. Their arms were heavy, their legs weak, but their spirit burned hotter with each strike. Aaron stood at the broken wall, his weapon nearly empty. He had fired so many shots that the barrel glowed red. Sweat covered his face, mixing with ash and dirt. Around him, the settlers fought with spears, axes, and stones, their voices rising louder than the screams of the creatures. Myra was near the center of the camp, her hands blackened from smoke. The shield device was gone, but she had refused to stop working. She had pulled wires, pipes, and broken machines together, creating a new plan. She was no longer trying to protect with walls of energy. She was building something to fight back. Sparks flew as she twisted metal into shape, her eyes locked with determination. Bren was a tower of strength. His hammer rose and fell like a storm, smashing any beast that came close. His breath was rough, his arms shaking, but he fought as if the weight of the entire settlement was on his shoulders. The settlers around him drew courage from his example. Every time he struck, they struck harder. Then, a moment came when the settlers nearly broke. The creatures gathered together and rushed the camp in one massive wave. They were faster than before, louder than before, their glowing eyes shining like fire in the smoke. The ground shook as their claws struck the earth in unison. The settlers saw the flood of bodies and for a second, fear touched their hearts. "Stand firm!" Aaron shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. "This is the last wall. If we fall together, but we do not run." The settlers tightened their line. Spears pressed forward, stones were lifted high, and hammers were raised. They braced for the storm. The wave crashed against them. The first row of creatures slammed into the line, and the settlers nearly fell. Screams filled the air as claws tore into shields and wood. But Aaron was there, firing into the mass. Bren roared as he struck, knocking 3 down with one swing. The settlers fought like a single body, pushing back with all their strength. For a moment, the line bent but did not break. Then Myra shouted from behind, "Hold them just a little longer." She had finished her creation. From broken machines, pipes, and the remains of the shield device, she had built a weapon. It was rough and unstable, but it carried power. A long coil glowed with energy as she connected the last wire. She aimed it at the largest group of creatures and triggered it. A blast of light shot out, striking the beasts with force like thunder. The ground shook as the creatures were thrown back, their bodies smoking from the surge. The settlers gasped in awe, then cheered with new hope. The beasts who had been fearless now staggered, confused by the sudden power. Aaron saw the hesitation. He lifted his weapon and shouted, "Now we strike. Push them back. This is our night, not theirs." The settlers roared and surged forward. Spears drove into the creatures' chests, hammers crushed their bones, and fire spread across the ruins as torches were thrown. The beasts shrieked and stumbled. For the first time, the settlers were not only defending. They were attacking. Bran led a charge on the left side, smashing through a cluster of glowing eyes. Behind him, others followed, their blades cutting with fierce strength. On the right side, Aaron pushed forward, his shots tearing holes in the enemy ranks. Myra fired her weapon again, and another wave of beasts fell. The creatures tried to circle, but the humans had learned. They moved in groups, covering each other, striking in patterns. Where one settler weakened, another stepped in. Where a line bent, someone filled the gap. They fought as one people, their voices rising in unbroken unity. The battle turned. One by one, the creatures began to fall back. Their screams grew higher, no longer only filled with rage but now touched with fear. They had never known prey that fought like this. They had never known prey that refused to fall. Myra's weapon sparked and nearly broke, but it had already done its work. The settlers now believed. They no longer looked at the beasts as unstoppable nightmares. They saw them as enemies that could bleed, break, and be defeated. The night carried on, but the tide had shifted. Where earlier the settlers had been cornered, now they were pushing outward. Fires burned high, lighting the ruins, and in that firelight the humans looked like warriors of legend. Bran smashed the last of a group and looked around, his chest heaving. "They are pulling back," he said, his voice rough but strong. Aaron nodded, his eyes sharp. "They know we will not break. Let them run. Tonight we show them who we are." The settlers cheered again, their voices shaking the ruins. Children shouted from the roofs, waving torches, their small voices joining the chorus. Every heart burned with the same flame. But Aaron knew the fight was not over. The creatures were not gone. They were only retreating into the shadows to strike again. Still, something important had changed. The settlers had survived the worst wave and turned it back. They had proven to themselves and to the beasts that humans were not prey. Myra sat on the ground, her weapon smoking beside her. She was tired to the bone, but she smiled. "We made them fear us," she whispered. Aaron stood tall at the wall, his weapon resting against his shoulder. He looked out into the dark where the glowing eyes were fading away. His voice was calm but firm. "This night will not break us. We will hold until the sun rises, and when it does, the world will see that humans are not weak. We fight. We endure. We win." The settlers lifted their weapons, their voices rising one last time. The firelight painted their faces with gold and shadow, and their eyes were fierce. The turning point had come, and it belonged to them. The night was not over, but for the first time since it began, hope filled the camp. The beasts had seen human strength, and they would never forget it. The night slowly gave way to dawn. The stars faded into a pale sky, and the first light touched the land with faint silver. Smoke still rose from the ruins of the camp, and the smell of burned wood hung heavy in the air. But within those ruins, people still stood. The settlers had survived the storm. They were bloodied, bruised, and exhausted, yet they were alive. Around the broken walls, the ground was littered with the fallen bodies of the creatures. The glowing eyes that had haunted the dark were gone. The screams had faded into silence. Aaron stood at the highest part of the ruined wall, his face black with ash. He looked across the horizon as the sun began to rise. The light touched the land, turning the smoke into gold and shadows into soft shapes. He breathed deep and steady, knowing what the sunrise meant. It was more than the end of the night. It was the proof that humans could endure even the darkest storm. Bran walked slowly across the camp, his hammer resting on his shoulder. His steps were heavy, but his spirit was strong. As he passed, settlers clapped his back, their eyes filled with gratitude. He had been their shield through the night, and though his arms shook from endless fighting, he carried himself with pride. Myra sat near her broken machine, her hands burned and fingers cut. The weapon had been pushed beyond its limit, and now it was nothing more than twisted metal. Still, she looked at it with a smile. It had done its work. It had given her people hope when hope was almost gone. That was enough. Children came out from the shelters, their small faces pale but curious. They looked at the battlefield with wide eyes, then looked at their parents with awe. They saw them not only as mothers and fathers but as warriors who had stood against the night. The children's voices rose with cheer, their laughter breaking the silence that had weighed on everyone. The settlers gathered in the center of the camp. Their clothes were torn, their weapons dull, but their eyes burned with pride. They had faced what many thought could not be faced. They had held the line when the world itself seemed ready to crush them. Aaron raised his voice so all could hear. We were tested by the night. It tried to break us, but we stand. It tried to silence us, but we speak. It tried to take our home, but we will build again. Let this sunrise remind us of who we are. We are human, and we do not fall. The settlers raised their weapons and tools high. A wave of voices answered him, strong and united. The sound carried into the hills, echoing across the valley. It was not only a cheer. It was a promise. The creatures had pulled back into the shadows, but no one believed they were gone forever. They would come again, maybe stronger, maybe in greater numbers. But now the settlers were no longer afraid. They had seen the truth. The creatures could be fought. The night could be endured. Humanity could stand. Myra walked to Aaron's side, her face tired but proud. We should rebuild quickly, she said. They will not give us much time before they return. Aaron nodded. Yes, but when they do, we will be ready. We have learned. We will not be caught in fear again. Bran joined them, his hammer still in hand. He looked out at the valley, his voice calm. Last night, they saw us as prey. Now they know better. When they come again, they will remember this fire. All around, the settlers began to move. They pulled down broken walls to rebuild stronger ones. They cleared the field of fallen enemies, piling them as proof of what had been done. They gathered tools, tended wounds, and comforted the weak. Every task was done with steady hands. They were no longer a scattered group of frightened people. They were a community forged in fire. As the sun climbed higher, light filled the ruins. Birds began to return to the sky, their songs soft but steady. Nature itself seemed to honor the victory. The settlers paused to listen, their hearts lifting with each note. It was the sound of a new beginning. Children ran to help carry stones, their laughter mixing with the calls of workers. For them, the fear of the night was already fading. What remained was pride in the courage of their people. Their voices carried joy, and that joy gave strength to the weary adults. Myra watched them and whispered, they will grow up remembering this night. Not with fear, but with pride. They will know we stood. Aaron placed a hand on her shoulder. And that memory will guide them. It will remind them that no matter how dark the night, the dawn will come if we hold together. The settlers worked through the morning, building, mending, and planning. The camp began to take shape again. It would not be easy. The scars of the night would remain for a long time. But within those scars was strength. By noon, they had raised a new wall of stone and wood. It was not finished, but it stood tall enough to show their will. Fires were lit to cook food, and the smell of bread and broth filled the air. Children ate first, then the fighters, their faces softening as hunger gave way to warmth. Bran sat with his hammer beside him, eating in silence. He looked at the others, then at the rising wall, and allowed himself a small smile. "We did not only survive," he said quietly. "We became something greater." Aaron heard him and nodded. "Yes. Last night was the night of screams. But today is the day of voices. Our voices. Strong, proud, and unbroken." The settlers lifted their cups and bowls in agreement. They had lost much, but they had gained something no enemy could take away. They had gained unity, courage, and the knowledge that humanity could endure anything. As the day went on, watchmen took their places at the walls. Their eyes searched the horizon, ready for whatever would come. They no longer feared the glowing eyes in the shadows. They had seen them fade before, and they would see them fade again. When evening came, the settlers gathered once more at the center of camp. The sun was setting, painting the sky with red and gold. Aaron stood again before them, his voice steady. "We are not finished. The night will come again. But now we know that we are stronger than the dark. Remember this day. Remember this sunrise. Let it be the mark of our beginning, not our end." The settlers cheered once more, their voices echoing across the valley. They were ready for the future. The night of screams had tried to end them. Instead, it had shaped them. The creatures had seen prey, but what they had found was a people who refused to bow. And when the night came again, humanity would meet it not with fear but with fire. The stars began to appear once more in the sky, but this time the settlers looked at them without dread. They looked at them with pride. They had proven that even in the darkest hours, humans could fight, endure, and rise. The night had not broken them. The night had made them.